Hello, I'm Tony Collins and this is the Rugby Reloaded podcast. So it's Easter weekend and in time-honoured rugby tradition, it's that time of the year when you get two games over one long weekend. So, in emulation of those players who are putting their bodies on the line twice in 4 days, this is the first of two Easter podcasts. And as it's an Easter special, I thought I'd choose a completely off-the-wall topic. So I'm going to talk about Sherlock Holmes and the mysterious case of rugby's great split. You might be asking, what does a cocaine-addicted, violin-playing, Baker Street-dwelling amateur detective have to do with rugby? But in fact, Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, saw himself as part of the rugby world that cracked apart in 1895. One of his less well-known Sherlock Holmes stories is The Adventure of the Missing Three-Quarter, which was first published in the Strand magazine in 1904. It's one of the few examples of an adult story featuring rugby that was published in the first few decades of the game. Of course, there were lots of children's stories about rugby. The sport's early popularity owed a huge amount to the success of Tom Brown's School Days, which was published in 1857 and essentially started the genre of the school story. But rugby is rarely seen in more serious literature. Conan Doyle himself was a very keen supporter of rugby. He was educated at Stonyhurst, the Catholic private school in Lancashire, and played virtually every type of sport throughout his life. He wasn't the only best-selling author in Victorian times who was a rugby fan. Bram Stoker, the author of Dracula, was such a good forward during his time as a student at Trinity College Dublin that he is mentioned in Frank Marshall's 1892 History of Rugby, Football, the rugby union game. For Conan Doyle, rugby was the best collective sport. Strength, courage, speed and resource are great qualities to include in a single game, and he wanted to see it played in all schools. So it's perhaps not surprising that eventually rugby would end up being central to one of his many short stories about the master detective. Indeed, Sherlock Holmes himself can be seen as the epitome of the gentleman amateur, solving crimes for his enjoyment rather than for monetary gain. The Adventure of the Missing Three-Quarter concerns the mysterious disappearance of England three-quarter Godfrey Staunton, hours before he is due to play for Cambridge University against Oxford, then the most important club match in the season. Sherlock Holmes is engaged by the Cambridge captain, who explains that Staunton is one of the best players in England. Holmes knows nothing of sport, but the rugby-loving Dr. Watson, who in many ways is based on Conan Doyle himself, is suitably impressed. The story is actually rather weak, and it turns out that the missing player has simply gone to care for his secret wife, who is dying of TB. But the early stages of the story discuss what makes a good rugby player and stress the importance of the amateur spirit. It's actually more interesting from a rugby perspective than it is as a mystery story. Conan Doyle explains why Staunton is such an excellent player. A good three-quarter, he says, not only has to be an expert at passing the ball and tackling, but also must be a good dribbler, punter and drop kicker. This has led to some debate amongst fans of the Sherlock Holmes stories, known as Sherlockians, who have suggested that Conan Doyle may have made a mistake in his description of the essential skills of a three-quarter. Even in rugby union, there seems to be no need for a centre or a winger to be an expert kicker, let alone a dribbler of the ball. But Conan Doyle knew his stuff. In the 1890s, the decade when the story was set, rugby union was focused on kicking skills. A penalty goal was worth 3 points, exactly the same as a try, and a drop goal was even worth 4 points. Many in rugby union believed that goals were far more important than tries. Arthur Budd, a president of the Rugby Football Union and the brother of one of Conan Doyle's closest friends at medical school, argued in 1897 that the very fact that try-getters are plentiful while goal-droppers are scarce shows that the latter art is very much more difficult of acquirement. Why, I should like to ask, ought the more skillful piece of play to be depreciated while a premium is placed on mere speed of foot? In contrast, the clubs in the north of England who created the Northern Union in 1895 took the opposite view, as the Yorkshire Post explained in 1888. The acme of good play is when a skillful three-quarter or halfback finishes up a skillful or dashing run by dodging a fullback and planting the ball over the line. In the north, no other part of the game is more applauded than this. So the story inadvertently highlights one of the dividing lines over which rugby split in 1895. Although as far as I know, Conan Doyle never commented on the split or on the Northern Union. This was definitely not true of his great friend, Bertram Fletcher Robinson. Born in 1870, Fletcher Robinson was a well-known rugby journalist. He also provided some of the inspiration for perhaps the most famous of all Sherlock Holmes stories, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Like Conan Doyle, Robinson was a keen rugby player, good enough to play for Cambridge University in 3 varsity matches against Oxford, as well as against Lancashire a couple of times. He was also a committed and vocal supporter of the RFU and its battle against the northern clubs. In 1896 he published a book called Rugby Football. It describes his experiences in the game, including playing against northern clubs, and argues against the recent formation of the Northern Union. As well as opposing payments to players, Fletcher Robinson also highlighted the different conceptions of the RFU and the Northern Union about how rugby should be played. It has been seriously proposed by the northern clubs to alter the rules and reduce the number of players, in order that the game may be faster and more pleasing to spectators. I shrewdly suspect that, if the truth be told, they hope, by knocking off 2 forwards and playing 13 aside, to be able to save on weekly wages. A travelling circus of 15 men is an expensive establishment to keep up. Not surprisingly, given his sarcastic tone, he also became one of the first of many people to predict the death of the Northern Union, barely 12 months after it had been formed. The professional player, he believed, would eventually die out because they would corrupt sports, and consequently in the North, rugby football will disappear with him. It didn't. However, Conan Doyle's stories and Fletcher Robinson's journalism do show how the 1895 rugby split was not just an internal dispute between rugby clubs. It reflected the state of British society and its concerns in the late Victorian era. We shouldn't be surprised at this. Rugby is always as much about society as it is about the game. As Holmes might have put it, this is an elementary fact, not just about rugby, but about sport as a whole. I hope you've enjoyed this Easter special episode of the Rugby Reloaded podcast. If you want to follow me on Twitter, my name is @CollinsTony, and if you want to dig a bit deeper into the history of rugby and the other football codes, take a look at the Rugby Reloaded website at www.rugbyreloaded.com. On Monday, we'll be following up the recent BBC Wales documentary The Rugby Code Breakers and asking why Wales seems to play the wrong type of rugby. Until then, thanks for listening.